Dr. Zac Lamas presented at the CSBA meeting, and we've heard from him as journeyman in a couple different situations here recently. But I think he has a really nice way of presenting about the management that he's done in his colonies. He is a PhD. He's got great experience in research, but before he got his PhD, he was raising queens and keeping bees commercially. So he has a lot of beekeeping experience, and he's a really good communicator. So I'm really excited to hear from him again. I'll stop sharing my screens and he should be able to share his.
Oh, there's the guy.
Hey, thanks, KT. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Hey,
you.
everyone. I'm over here on East Coast time, so it's 9 o'clock over here. I'm in my office at the USDA, and what I'm going to do is present. It's a concise presentation on how to requeen your colony. It goes over 3 methods. We want to both simplify the process and take some of the fear away from it if you are a new beekeeper or haven't handled your queens very much. And so I'm going to jump right into that. And it's very pertinent for spring management. Let me just pull this right up. And slideshow. Beginning. All right, so everyone should see a blue screen right here. Okay, perfect. So this is actually a picture of one of my yards that I used to have in upstate New York. And this picture pretty much says everything I want from my colonies come fall in upstate New York. So my colonies are in their winter configurations. This is either 2 or 3 boxes. They're full of adult bees. Those bees have been managed for mites, so the mite levels are very low. Those winter bees aren't being impacted by mites feeding on them late in the fall. They're full of honey. We have really strong flows in upstate New York. If we don't, we do have to sugar feed. And then my requeening's done. And one thing that often gets missed with requeening is in my operation in Michael Palmer's, we're requeening before we have a crisis. If we have to requeen when we have a crisis, sometimes we won't even do the requeen, we'll just do a unite. And the reason for that is it's much easier to save a colony prior to it being in crisis or on its way to failing than it is to try to do a 180-degree turnaround with it. So all of my requeening in this apiary was actually done in late May and June. You know, I'm identifying colonies then that have potential issues, marking them for requeening, and then when I have queens available, I go ahead and do that requeen. But what I'm not doing is letting colonies with suspected issues go through the whole season and then trying to do a round of requeens in, let's say, late August. Because now I'm not giving that colony that queen ample time to replace all of the worker bees she needs for the winter. The first thing I really want to do.
We're seeing your slides with the notes.
That is not helpful.
I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. So here, I'm going to stop share for a second.
You had a great flow going and I screwed it up.
Nope, it's okay. So what I had was my other screen was connected to my monitor. I disconnected that and I should be able to. Now you should see just me milking a cow.
Yep.
Okay. So let me jump right into this. Hey, the reason I have this picture here is I really want every new beekeeper to understand that when you learn beekeeping, you're learning a task in a different way than you've ever been asked to learn before. And it's inherently unfair. And the reason being is there's no repetition of tasks in beekeeping. If there is a repetition of tasks, there's a long time between the same tasks. And your conditions are rapidly going to change. This is different than how we ask you to learn anything else. So if I wanted you to learn how to skateboard, I'd get you a skateboard, you'd walk out to the pavement and you would get on the skateboard. The next day you'd get on the same skateboard, and the next day you'd get on the same skateboard. I wouldn't have you go from skateboard to ice skates to rollerblades. That would make no sense, right? But this is exactly what we're doing when we ask you to do bees, because you install a package once a year. If you mess up on that, you don't get to practice again until the next year, right? So your repetition is 1, and you don't see that same task until a year later. Whereas if I was to do something like, let's say, milk this cow, I'm doing it every 12 hours. And so when this is the first cow that I got, and she's the cow that I learned how to milk on. That poor thing had to deal with me not knowing how to milk a cow. But every 12 hours, you have to go milk that cow. So and it's the same cow I'm going down to, it's the same stool that I'm balancing on. And, after, 3 rounds, you know how to milk a cow. You don't get to do this with beekeeping. And so I point that out. So if you're a new beekeeper or you've only been in your hives for a couple of years, give yourself a break. We're asking you to learn in a way that you haven't had to learn before. And it really is inherently unfair. I just clicked my mouse, but the slide didn't progress yet. So let me click. I didn't want to go too far. Anyways, long story short, I learned how to milk that cow. Then we got a few more and we started peddling a lot of raw milk. And it's pretty simple to grow that way. Now, I had the benefit of working up at Mike Palmer's. And a really special thing about working up at Mike's is we do queen catches in the summer. And we catch queens every 4 days in the summer. We catch, I think it was 158 queens a day. As far as operations go, it's not that much, but if you're a new beekeeper, you're going to see more tiny colonies and the opportunity to see more queens in one day up at Mike's than you probably would for your whole beekeeping life with just a hive in your backyard. We get a lot of repetition up there. So if you're not good at finding queens on the first day, 4 days later, you're going to be really good at finding queens. So we have the opportunity to do a lot of repetition, but normal beekeepers don't. So here in Maryland, I offered queen catch courses where you could actually come out to my apiaries and catch queens out of 5-frame nukes. And beekeepers love this because they would have an opportunity to go through 30 nukes, pick up queens, paint queens, and the repetition they'd have in a single day was really high. Now, the reason I'm pointing all of this out is when you're a new beekeeper, you get more lecture and instruction than you actually do time in a hive. And every time you're in the hive by yourself, it's like going out into the wild. You're learning something or seeing something or experiencing something for the first time. If you mess up, you don't necessarily know if you messed up. Also, if you see an oddity, you don't know if it's an oddity. So for example, I have 2 pictures of queen cells over here. One is a cup with multiple eggs in it, and one is a cup that I had torn open for the picture that has a larva and jelly in the bottom. And one of these is irregular and one of them is okay. And just as a spoiler alert, the one up top, if you go through our queen catches, you'll quickly pick up this is a laying worker hive. 100% of the time when you have multiple eggs in a queen cup, it's a laying worker hive. But if you only have 1 or 2 hives in your backyard, you wouldn't necessarily know that. The reason, again, I'm taking this time at the beginning of a requeening course to say this is you may not have that experience just because of lack of repetition, so give yourself a break. And every time you receive instruction, we tell you the dozens of ways that you can kill one of your queens. And then by the time you actually have to try to find the queen, handle her, or requeen her, you have all of this daunting information before you actually have to deal with trying to help your colony. So I'm just trying to demystify it a little and take away some of the stress. So the first thing you have to do is be able to find your queen. I encourage people not to try to find your queen. You're trying to isolate her. Often I'll see newer beekeepers open up the top of their colony, smoke, and then start working the hive top down. This is the exact opposite of how we work large colonies. So up at Mike's, for example, there's a colony we have deconstructed here. We smoked the entrance, we lightly smoked the top box. And by the way, when we smoke, we're lightly smoking. We're using enough smoke that the colony won't come out and sting us when we open it, but we're not using so much smoke that we're pushing bees off of the frames. This is really important because if you're trying to find your queen, the heavier you smoke and the more that you disrupt their normal social behavior, the harder it is going to be to find your queen. You can push her right off the frames and she'll try to hide in the bottom of the box or on one of the side walls. Now she's very difficult to find. So again, we go in, we lightly smoke, and we take the whole hive right apart. We just pop each box off and set it on its own stand. We often use upside down covers or empty boxes as a hive stand. So the hive right here in the front right here by the smoker, this is the top box right there is the brood chamber from one of these colonies. The box underneath it is just a empty junk 10-frame box that we're using as a temporary table. That's it. Over here, you can see we used a telescopic cover as a stand for the honey supers. Now, the reason I say we're trying to isolate her is we didn't start pulling frames right away. We separated boxes. So whatever box she's in when we first approached the colony, she's still in there. What I'm not doing is starting to pull the honey supers, frames from them and smoke it and push her down. Because when I do that, I'm now pushing her potentially to the bottom of the box. I'd rather take my chance going through just 10 frames to find her than 60 frames to find her. And that's why we want you to try to isolate her. So we literally take the colony apart. We assume she's not in the honey super. She totally could be in the honey super. She could be anywhere in the colony or outside the colony. And I don't joke to you about outside the colony. We couldn't find queens before. I literally took the bottom board, flipped it upside down. She was right underneath the colony. My friend told me to go. Anyways, I won't say what he said. Sorry. So we isolate them, and then we just look at whichever box we think she's in. We start going through that. She definitely can be up in the honey supers, but this is how we go about it to try to speed it up in these large colonies. So here I have a picture. Here's my colony right here, and then I just separate all of the boxes. Whichever box I think she's in, I'm going to go into that one first. I'm trying to reduce the number of frames that I'm actually having to go into. And this is what Jeremy's doing in upstate New York. By the way, we have these strong summer flows all the way until August. So we can get away with leaving frames and boxes and honey supers out like we are in this yard here in upstate New York. I understand not everyone is able to do that. This is a huge benefit that we have. We're not going to get robbed out by working colonies like this. If you are going to get robbed out, you're going to want extra covers to cover everything. The other thing that we'll often do is to take an extra inner cover and set it on the ground. See how I have these frames right here all side by side? We're doing that because we don't want to see clumps of bees on the ends of the frames or bees to start running away from us. We want our bees to act as normal as possible so that if we miss the queen, we can go back and try to find her, and the colony stays as calm as possible. So we kind of work our colony like a book, if you will, where each frame is a page, and we keep it together like a book. The reason you might want to turn an upside down inner cover there is if bees start to fall off or aggregate on the bottom, you can just dump them back into your colony. When I'm looking for the queen on a frame, I'm not trying to find the queen. I'm just scanning the frame, and I'm looking across it in both directions, just letting my eyes go across and across. The best way I can describe why we scan a frame like this is similar to how a hunter will say they didn't look for the deer. They just saw like the twitch of a tail or the movement of the ear, and then they saw the whole deer. You're kind of doing the same thing with the queen. So your eyes will pick up patterns. If you have an opportunity to do a queen catch with us, your eyes and your mind are going to be working together, and they're going to figure out the movement pattern, the walking pattern of a queen, and how it's different than the walking pattern of all your other bees. Again, this takes repetition. So if you only have one hive in your backyard, it could become really difficult for you to have enough repetition to find that queen. Whereas, you know, if you're like us and next or the end of this week, we're going to go out and look for 30 queens just for like a little research project we have. Well, any of the undergrads working with me have an opportunity to try to find 30 queens. That's a lot of repetition in a day. They're going to start to pick up these patterns pretty quick. And so when I am looking at my frame, I'm just scanning down until I see, and they're on the last one, that last circle is my queen. Yes, she has a blue dot, so she stands out, but I'll actually pick up the movement of her body and the fact that she has this retinue around her. So mated queens move differently on the frame than virgin queens. Your adult bees will largely ignore a virgin queen. So you'll see that virgin queen running along the top of the adult bees in the colony, whereas a mated queen is too ladylike to do that. She's going to walk on the comb, and the other bees will move apart for her. This pattern that you can see right here, where she has a retinue, is something that your eyes will learn to spot very quickly. Again, isolate her, don't find her. Now, the next thing you have to do is handle a queen, and that means picking her up. Bees are just like us. I have a head, chest, tummy. Bees have head, thorax, abdomen. If it's squishy on me, then it's squishy on a bee. So that means if you were to come up and give me a hug, you'd hug me like around my shoulders and my chest. You wouldn't hug me around my belly. Same thing with the queen. Her abdomen is essentially nothing but ovaries. I mean, it's a digestive tract with ovaries. You don't want to squeeze that. You could damage her. And anyone that was in KT's master class who did the dissections on the queens, I forget which member brought in all those queens, but that was awesome. Got to see how big queen ovaries are. They're massive. So this is why when you're picking up your queens, you can pick them up by the thorax right here, or you can pick them up by the wings, but you won't pick them up by the abdomen. I have 3 different pictures right here. You can grab that queen by her wings. You can grab her top and bottom on the thorax or side by side on the thorax. If you can pick this up as a skill, I highly suggest if you have a queen that you need to requeen, practice with her. It's still a queen, so you have skin in the game, but it's a queen you're going to end up offing anyway. So if you mess up holding her, it's not the end of the world. But I really like this because I'll be working with someone and someone will be like, queen. I'll grab the queen by the wings and put her in a part of the hive that I'm no longer going to work in, which means we can make nukes quicker. We can move frames around without thinking like we're going to squish a queen. So this can be a really handy tool for your tool set. Now that I just talked about that as an intro, we're going to get into 3 different methods for how you can requeen your colonies in your apiaries. These methods are fine whether you're a beginner or a sideliner. Some of these methods that you'll use as a commercial beekeeper. Although to be really practical, a lot of commercial beekeepers are making splits and just adding a 3-hole cage, or they're requeening with cells because it's so inexpensive and quick. I mean, it's labor non-intensive and it's inexpensive because it's a queen cell. We're going to focus on actually introducing mated queens. So we're going to exclude requeening with queen cells or virgin queens right now. In the early spring, I like to requeen with a nucleus colony. My goal is to boost the population of the adult bees in that colony while changing over my queen. For example, I have a colony over here on the left that did not overwinter very well. I want to boost the adult bee population so it looks like that colony in the foreground of the second picture where it has a huge adult bee population, and change the queen. The reason I want to do this with a nuke is I'm at maple flow right now. I want this colony to be strong enough to make honey by basswood flow. In upstate New York, between sweet clover and basswood and what's the other thing? Staghorn sumac, I can make 4 or 5 boxes of honey. Well, that's a few $100s in honey for me. If I just requeened with the queen early in the spring, I might miss out on that honey flow. But by adding the nuke, I'm hedging my bets that I'll get paid back for that nuke via a proper honey crop, i.e. the colony will be strong enough by my main flow. For example, what I did was I moved a nuke and placed it right on top of a colony that I want to requeen in this apiary. The reason I put it on top is I get busy, and what I might do is take, let's say, 10 nukes, put them on my truck, and then drive around the apiaries that need to get requeened. I'll put the nukes on top of those colonies and then come back a couple days later when I have more time. These bees are going to orientate here. When I combine the nuke into the colony, they'll still be orientated to this vertical stack. So you have a little bit of flexibility when you requeen with the nuke. Anytime, essentially requeening with a nuke, you're just transferring your nuke to 10-frame equipment. You have to find the old queen in the old colony and off her. That's a nice way to say kill. We'll just continue to say off for the rest of the presentation. And then you do a newspaper recombined, placing the new queen and all of her bees on top. So anytime you see newspaper in my operations or at Mike Palmer's newspaper like this, that was a newspaper recombine from the year before. You want to keep the brood intact. Don't checkerboard at this time of the year and ensure the queen is there. So this is the nucleus colony that I'm transferring to 10-frame equipment. Don't checkerboard, just keep the brood right intact, especially if it's early spring. We don't want to make it more difficult for these bees to thermoregulate the brood. And then I'm going to go through step by step how we do this. So this is an apiary that I have in Maryland. There are 5 colonies here. One of them needs to get requeened. If you notice, every single colony has lots of bees at the entrance, except for the last one. That's the last colony. They were pretty weak. They couldn't even draw out their foundation for that season. So what I did was I went through to find the queen. I isolated her. When I found her, I offed her, which you just do what's called the hive tool test. I don't have to explain that any further. And then you will condense the colony to the best you can. I usually just take out all unused frames and try to condense it down to a box or two, because we're going to be adding another box to this colony anyways. The nuke I'm recombining with is set right side by side. Again, if I set it side by side or on top of the colony just to temporarily store, it's great, because all these forager bees, once I remove this nuke and combine it to this green box over here, they're just going to reorientate to this entrance. But what I don't want to do is set this 20 feet away. That's a hassle then. Don't have second guesses when you're doing this. For example, this is one halfway decent brood frame from this queen. And you get into there and you're like, oh, but she was able to just get rid of her. This is the best that colony was able to do all year. She's not worth it. Then you're just putting an empty box on top, making space for the nuke. If you don't have drawn frames, put foundation on the outside. I didn't have newspaper for this demo, so I just used lab sheet notebooks, placed the nuke right in the center. This is what it'll look like at the end. My nuke's and the queen's right here. My paper is in the second box right here in the middle. And then you're done. That's it. That's a that's a requeening with a nucleus colony. The reason we put the queen and all of her bees on top is colonies naturally supersede top down. So we're simply recreating that in this colony. The second thing is we want this queen protected by her bees until her smell and her bees permeate the old colony. By putting the new queen and her bees down below, they have to deal with all the incoming foragers and guard bees. So we're preventing that as a potential issue by placing this on top. Here's a great example of why we would do a requeen this way. This is Kate Blofson. She's an excellent beekeeper up at Mike's. Here's a colony that we, if you look at the newspaper down here, that we requeened with a nucleus colony early in the spring. 1, 2, 3, that's my brood chamber. A deep of honey, medium of honey, medium of honey, medium of honey, medium of honey. So we got what, 160, 220 pounds of honey off of a colony that was weak in the spring by simply taking a nucleus colony and placing it into it. We feel this is an economically really good use of a nucleus colony for a couple reasons. One, we made a honey crop, which is how Mike makes the majority of his money. Second, by requeening it early in the season, we no longer have a colony with an issue that we have to deal with for the rest of the season. We put almost no labor into this colony in May, June, and July. That's excellent. That means we can do other things. Whereas if we didn't fix the queen early on, we might have to do other work with it. And again, if we're not adding honey boxes to colonies or removing honey boxes from colonies, we're not making money. So this is a really nice requeening method for us. The bad thing about requeening with a nuke is for hobbyist beekeepers, they're expensive. So we're asking you to buy in like a $200 nuke and then just use it to requeen a colony. I understand that's not ideal. If you are making a handful of nukes in the season in your own operation, then requeening with a nuke, even in the fall, is an excellent way to do requeening because it's super easy. If you have a colony with an issue, they often have a lot of older bees, which makes it difficult to introduce a queen in just a cage. So I really like requeening with a nuke. And it does the same purpose, which is you're artificially boosting the population before the winter, which is what that colony is going to need to build enough winter bees. So now we're transitioning to, one second, I need a drink of water. So now we're transitioning to a different requeening method. This is the most difficult method. It's extremely time sensitive and you have to be able to handle your queens. Some beekeepers love it. Mike loves it. A lot of researchers use it. And the reason we use it is you get a very high success rate. What you're doing is you are placing a new queen underneath a mesh cage that the house bees in whatever colony you're putting her in can't sting her through. She's protected underneath this cage. and you're letting her stay in there for a few days until her smells permeate the colony, and then you release her. All you need to do this method are the items in this picture. So you need your new queen, which often comes in some sort of shipping cage. You need a wire mesh cage. This mesh is number 8 hardware cloth. You can get it on Amazon now, super cheap. And you cut it to roughly a 3x5 index card shape. Don't be super anal about this, just get it close. It's going to be fine. Don't make it super big either. You're going to find it difficult to keep it pressed into, oh, I should probably mention this. We're pressing this right into the face of your comb. So if you make it super long, it's going to be hard to keep it pressed right into the comb. So 3x5 is a really good estimate. You need a black magic marker, and you need a frame of emerging brood. If you're not familiar with what emerging brood looks like, you'll often see a dark patch in the center of the frame, and then capped brood around that dark patch. This dark patch represent bees that have already emerged. These bees are going to be emerging shortly. We would put this queen underneath, we would take her out of here and put her underneath this cage and press it right into this area. The queen has food, so she's fine, she can eat. And within a few hours, these newly emerged bees are going to emerge. They can't sting the first day. For the first 24 hours, they can't sting. And they don't know it's not their queen. So they will, within a day, start taking care of her. They'll clean out the cells they just came out of, and she'll be able to lay into those cells, and she'll be attended and fed. So let's go through this. I already kind of talked about that. So what you have to do is get your queen underneath this cage and push it into the face here. I don't have videos of that. I actually need to grab someone to come out to an apiary while I do this. I believe Michael Palmer actually has a video online, so if you want to watch that, it's a great demo. But it feels like you have a bear trap in one hand and your queen in another, which can be a little daunting. And what you have to be able to do is put the queen on the frame and then quickly push down the cage before she runs out underneath it. You also have to get her out of that 3-hole shipping cage and hold her in one hand and then transfer her to your dominant hand so you can put her underneath there. So it's a little technical. It's not for the faint of heart, and if you haven't practiced it. Also, they don't always run out of these cages. Kate Blofson and I were requeening one day. We would do this inside Mike's truck, because if you missed a queen or lost a queen, you could just grab her from the windshield or something. And Kate was in there for the longest time trying to get queens out because they just won't come out of the cage sometimes. And I would go into the truck and 20 seconds later, come right out with the queen underneath the cage. And she finally asked me, how am I doing it? And I would just rip the screen off the cage and let her fly against the windshield and then quickly grab her. Whereas Kate was like taking out the cork and puffing on it and waiting for her to come out, which could take minutes. And it's like 90-something degrees in that truck.
Is she tall enough to reach across the windshield? Maybe you have an advantage.
She's tall. No, we're almost the same height. So okay. Yeah, no, Kate can totally hold her own. But anyways, your frame's going to look like this. I highly suggest using one rubber band around it so that it doesn't, if it gets warm, fall off a little and artificially pre-release your queen. And you're going to then put this back into a colony. We put it right in the center of the brood nest. Mike runs 9 frames in his brood nest, so there's always space to put in one of these frames. If you run 10 frames, your cage is going to take up too much space, so you need to remove a frame. If you don't, the backside of that wire mesh cage that you make is going to be right up against the adjacent frame, and any brood underneath there is going to die. They're going to try to emerge, and there's going to be this cage in their way. You also run the risk of any asphyxiation of your queen. So you got to pop out one frame and just make sure there's enough bee space that the bees can walk over the face of that mesh as well. That black magic marker is there for a very important reason. If you look down on this photo on the right, you can see my mesh cage, but I can't necessarily see it when I come back to my colony. So I put arrows right on top of that frame, and that says Queen's here. We write right on the back of the colony, which is we mark where the cage is, and this literally means here on July 26, 2017, a queen was placed in this cage. And then we'll often take a stone and put it on the back of the colony. The reason being is you get another visual of exactly which colony has a queen cage in it. You're going to wait 4 days. 4 days later, you come back and release this queen. And that's exactly what happens. I released this queen and then wrote queen OK 737. So 4 days later, I released the queen and everything was fine. And you're just leaving it for 4 days like that. And when you release her, it's the most anticlimactic thing. She just walks off the frame. So I have a video here of this. And that's it. It's a very easy method if you can handle your queens, but it's super time sensitive, so it's not for everyone.
Okay, I got a quick question on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were saying you put the cage on emerging brood. So that's not like an area of the cage that's got a lot of food in it. So what does she eat for those 4 days?
Yeah, let me go back to this photo. So this is a really good example. So the colonies that you're requeening often aren't great colonies. There's going to be some pretty patchy brood. And in those patches, you're likely to have some honey. This is sufficient for 4 days for a queen, whatever emerging brood is going to be out underneath there. And your nestmate bees will feed these bees through the wire mesh. I wouldn't worry about that. So if you look at this photo, this area, if you can just imagine where I'm drawing with my mouse right now, where I'm pressing that down into it, there's plenty of food right there and empty space for that queen and whatever bees emerge to take advantage of it. What you wouldn't want to do, and I'm glad you're asking this question, is place the frame over an entire area of capped brood. And the reason being is when these bees emerge, they can pack this area to the point where they're too crowded, and you don't want that. 30 to 50 bees is going to be plenty of emerged brood to take care of her in that space and clean out the cells and for her to lay. So I wouldn't overthink it, but that's plenty of food. If there's not, just take your hive tool, scrape a little of this and just push it into a cell and be done with it. But don't put so much that you think you can saturate your queen and get her honey covered in honey. There's something else I should mention too. All of our, because it came up at the meeting in Colorado, some of your members are making your own foundation. And the backing then, or the center of that foundation is pretty soft. We're using either plastic foundation or wired wax foundation. And this is really old comb. So we can push something like this right into that comb. This comb is super rigid at this point. If you have new comb that doesn't have a solid piece of foundation in the center, this can be difficult to place into it, and just kind of keep that in mind. I don't know how you do a workaround with that other than trial error and use a different requeening method.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And hey, so no, we're gonna skip the video. That's probably the most difficult one. If you don't have a reason to use it, then just keep it in your back pocket as something that you know about requeening and at least the process. You can also requeening with a cage on YouTube and probably watch Mike do it. But here's my favorite method now for requeening. And it's a Doolittle method of making nucleus colonies that you can simply use as a method for requeening. The photo here, almost all of the bees from this nucleus colony were shaken in the front of the hive. There's a queen excluder over the top box, and I restacked all the brood and honey on top of the hive. Now, why did I do this? Well, I used to work for Mike daytime, and I would only have the evenings to work my bees, and I had up to a few hundred colonies. So I had to find some ways to work really quickly. I couldn't find this queen. It was getting dark. I was about an hour and a half from home. So I really wanted to finish up. And what I did was I just shook all of the bees into the front of the colony, put it back together. She's going to climb right back into that colony, but she's going to be in the bottom box. So when I come back a couple days later, or even the next day or the next morning, I know this is all queen free and she's down here. Well, the reason I'm going, this is not the requeening method. The reason I'm sharing this is we often only think of our queen excluders in terms of honey production. There are extremely useful tool that could be used in multiple ways for the purposes of requeening. For example, at Mike's, and I know other operations that'll do this, we'll just put a queen excluder through every single box in a colony and come back 4 days later. Your queen, when she lays eggs, they hatch in 3 days. If we come back 4 days later, there should only be eggs in one box in the whole colony. So we're no longer even looking for a queen. We literally take the whole colony apart. Everyone gets a box. The first person that says eggs starts looking for a queen. Everyone else just starts putting their boxes back together. It's just a creative way to use a queen excluder, and I want you to possibly think of using it in different ways instead of just as a honey excluder. The Doolittle method uses the principle that nurse bees love attending brood, and they will not leave brood unattended. So what we're going to do is we're going to put brood with no bees on it whatsoever above a queen excluder. We're then going to draw nurse bees up through that queen excluder to cover that brood. We're going to temporarily use an inner cover as a cloak board to separate that queenless portion with all the nurse bees from the rest of the colony down below. We will now then have 2 colonies on one vertical stack. And we're going to introduce a queen in a candy cage directly into the colony on top with all the nurse bees. And the reason we do that is nurse bees have no allegiance. They're traders. They don't care what flag's on the ship. They just want to know there's a flag. If you isolate nurse bees from your colony, they will jump onto your hands and start to cover your cage when you bring a queen to it and start to try to feed her immediately. I made nukes this way before, and I didn't even get to the first colony, and there's bees flying out of their colonies to land on the boxes to try to take care of the queens. It's absolutely wonderful. That's the reason I love this requeening method. It's almost a surefire way to easily introduce a queen, and it's not time sensitive. And many of us have multiple things going on in our lives. So I want to be particularly sensitive that time-sensitive techniques might be a pain in the butt for some people. So let's go through this method. It's pretty easy. You're first going to start, which is you got to find your colony that needs to be requeened, and you're going to temporarily make a nuke above that existing colony. You're then going to introduce a queen into that nuke and wait a bit. You need to wait. There's no specific period of time. I should probably put it here, anywhere from a week to a month. And then eventually you're just going to do a unite like we did in the first chapter of this talk. If that wasn't clear, I'm going to go through the methods right now and it should make it clear. So step 1, you're going to take the original colony and make a nuke. So you're going to brush all of the bees off of the frame and place it right in front of the colony. I know I should have done my weed whacking if I was going to use these as photos. Brush all of the bees off, no bees, adult bees whatsoever, just empty brood, and put it in an empty box above a queen excluder on top of that very colony. The more brood that you put up, the more nurse bees that you'll draw from the bottom. So if it's an extremely weak colony, do not do this, because you're just going to be splitting your colony. It's too weak to do it. So this is for medium colonies or even colonies that have lots of bees but have a queen issue. I hesitate to say strong colony because that would infer your queen's doing well, but you can have a very strong colony and notice that the queen is on her way to becoming a drone layer. That would be a really good example of a colony that you want to requeen with this method. My nuke's here, almost no adult bees, and I'm going to place empty frames on the outside of it. Place your inner cover on top and walk away. That's it. Okay. 3 frames of brood, 2 frames of honey, queen bee-less above a queen excluder. That's it. When you come back 2 to 12 hours later, that's what it'll look like. Nurse bees will not leave brood unattended. They're going to go right up through this queen excluder and cover this brood. But again, your queen can't pass through that queen excluder, so you know this is queenless if you did it correctly. And the other nice thing about this is your bees place the appropriate amount of coverage on these brood frames. I didn't have to do any guesswork. You know, when people are making nukes for the first time, they're like, oh, do I have enough adult bees? Do I not have enough? If you make nukes this way, you never have to guess whether or not you added enough adult bees because the bees did it themselves, which is a really nice way to make a nuke, by the way. The next step now is I have to separate the colonies. We just use an inner cover and add duct tape to the top and bottom. That's a great way to go about this. And we often place it in the opposite direction of the existing colony. That's now my hive entrance. Add your queen. All I did was take my candy cage and place it right in the center. They'll accept her. They'll release her within the day or the next day, and she's going to be fine. These are nurse bees. They'll accept them right away. I usually let her lay in there for about a week, but it's any temporary time until she's accepted. So I say 5 days is a minimum. You can go a week. We've done it for a month. That's a little extreme. We got a little behind at work. So, but what I'm getting at is if you have a job or other things that you need to tend to, you can start this on one day and not have to finish it all on the same day. For example, let's say you're ordering queens in from someone and you're at this stage right here. You put your brood above a queen excluder. You closed it up. The bees came up through. And all of a sudden, you get a phone call from the person that was supposed to bring you a queen, and they're going to be delayed for 2 days. Oh no, what do? Just leave it like this. It's totally fine. You can just leave this with a queen excluder and all those bees for an extra 2 days. It's not the end of the world. And you can choose to exclude it on the day you know you're going to get your queen. Whereas if you already made a nucleus colony, or if you already squished your old queen, now you have to deal with emergency cells because no matter what, you got to wait 2 days. So that's the nice thing about this method is there's not too much sensitivity with when you do a step. So once you separate it, you can add that queen. They accept it right away. And now you wait. Again, this is temporary time. So let's say a week later, it's pouring rain. Okay, well, you just don't do it that day. And then let's say a couple days later, you have, a spouse's birthday or something. Go hang out with the spouse. Don't tell them you have to do something with your bees. That's a lie. You okay? We all know better, even during swarm season. So you have a lot of flexibility here. The next step is to go into this and find the old queen and kill her. So you need to go into the bottom and off her. If you can't find her right away, let's say you couldn't find her that whole evening, just put it back together and come back again, okay? But once you find her, squish her, and then all you're doing is a newspaper recombine at the end. I have 2 different orientations here. This is my nuke, the green box. I put the newspaper here, or I put it here. And the reason being is, this is a honey super right here. I hate having brood, because remember the old queen was laying down here. Brood, honey, brood. That's just a horrible separation in the colony that the colony has to deal with. What I really like is having all my brood continuous in a colony and the honey on top. The few number of bees that are going to be in this honey super, you can smoke most of them out, aren't going to be a big deal compared to the population of these bees right here. So either orientation is going to be fine. I think this one's slightly better. The other reason I really like this method is you do temporarily have 2 queens laying at the same time in the same vertical stack. And the awesome thing about that is you had a weak colony because the queen wasn't laying very well, but you get this little boost because the old queen's still laying and this new queen is laying as well. And then you eventually get to do the requeen. So you do get a little boost out of two queens laying at the same time. It's an extremely easy method. Let me know if I clearly communicated it, because now we're at the end of the talk. We went over, please don't stress out about handling your queens. We always tell you how you can kill your queen, then we finally tell you to pick her up, how to find a queen, and then 3 methods. I have a few minutes for a couple questions, and otherwise I hope this was helpful for your spring.
We have somebody who's been itching to ask a question here.
Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead.
Hi, Zach, and thank you. My name is Daniel. Zach, if I've already got a couple of supers on to prevent swarming, and I want to do the Doolittle method when I get my queen at the end of the month, I'm imagining that I will put the queen excluder down, put my put my new nuke on top, and the honey supers on top of that.
Daniel, is it a strong colony?
Very,
Very strong, and you're outside of extremely cold weather?
yes.
Don't worry about it. Put it right on top.
Okay.
Yeah, I've totally done that in North Carolina as a way to make nukes. I'll put my queen excluder and put 2 5-frame nukes on top. They don't quite fit. You do have to either have a slight opening or duct tape it. And my colony is brood, honey, brood. The nurse bees will still migrate up, but these are strong colonies. I mean, by strong, I mean they have lots of adult bees.
Yeah.
And we're out of extremely cold temperatures. So it's not like we're having 2 different clusters in a colony and asking the colony to cluster at night. It's going to be fine, especially if you're just talking about a few days.
Maybe not even a few days. I just go for a few hours probably. And then,
If you're making nukes out of it, what I like to do is I'll do this in the afternoon, and then the next morning I call setting it off. Because so this is slightly different conversation, everyone. If we're going to make nukes using this method, it's extremely efficient, especially for one person, and it's also great swarm control because I can have a bunch of strong colonies in my apiaries, and I can put brood with no bees on top of a strong colony and siphon adult bees from that colony. When I remove those nuke boxes the next day, I've actually done some swarm control because I removed brood from one colony, which reduces their resources, can help prevent swarming, especially when you add empty comb. But I also siphon bees from another strong colony. So it's really 2 birds with 1 stone. But what I really like to do, Daniel, is I'll do that in one afternoon. And because I'm doing one task, right? I'm just making nukes. I can make up 100 of these on my own in an afternoon. And then when the next morning, I just go and set them off. I just bring extra inner covers or bottom boards for my nukes and just take them right off and set them on a bottom board, put them on the truck and drive them right away.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Do we have any questions? I didn't see anything in the chat that was specific to Zach. Anything else for Zach before we let him go? Because it's 10 o'clock there.
Janelle?
They look like they're absorbing information in a good way. I wish you could see their faces.
Good stuff.
Thank you very much. Appreciate ya.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you very much, Dr. Lamas.
Cool. Well,
Thank
hey,
you.
thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you. Zach.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Thank you, Zach. Hey, Zach, I got 26 testers now for my project.
Kathy, you are the best. That is awesome. That is absolutely awesome. I'm sure most people here are familiar with it or have heard about it. So congrats on running that.
We
Look forward
should
to seeing
we should let Kathy tell our group about it since she's here tonight. We have a little bit of time after you disconnect, unless you want us to hang out and listen to her talk about it.
Kathy, I'd love to listen to it for a couple minutes, and then I'm actually going to go up and finish setting up an experiment this evening and then get scooting. So, but I'd love to hear that.
Kathy, do you want to be on the spot?
I'll try again.
And I have all of her paperwork and stuff. So if you are interested, it's easy for us to get this to you. Go for it, Kathy.
So really what I'm doing is working with Zach and testing the mites on drones.
Oh.
Zac has done a couple of research projects and kind of found out that the mites like the drone brood best, and there's research to support that. So what we're doing is collecting up to 40 drones, visually looking at the mites on the drones. And then we're putting the drones in alcohol, or I'm doing dish soap. We're going to swirl those drones for 30 seconds. And then we're going to swirl them for 4 15-second intervals. And then count the mites at each interval. When we have that total, then we will do our mite checks on the worker, just like we do the standard mite check test. And we'll be able to compare the drones with the workers. And not only that, with the data points that I have, I'm hoping to even collect a little bit more information to be able to send to Zac, and we'll look at what we have.
Well, have a good one.
It does mean you have to pick up the drones though, which is a good practice for picking up the queens.
That was the comment I was gonna make.
Kathy beat you to it. Kathy, I love how organized you have been with all of this, and your ability to collect 26 people together to run this. You're going to have a huge data set.
I hope so. Yeah, thank you very much.
No, it's awesome. Cool. Katie, Tina, Kathy, everyone, thanks for having me on this evening. I'm going to scoot right upstairs and be good to myself, so I'm not here too late, but it's always a blast with everyone in Colorado. I'll chat with you all later.
Thank you.
Cheers.